Thank you. Thank you very much. And I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It's a very, very big honor for me. I know a number of people who've been in this particular position that I'm in, and the fact that this group of people are here is a tribute really to this great organization, the Center for Security Policy. They unfortunately are not perfect because they forgot something very important about me, and I'm going to tell it to you right now. What I am most proud of is that I was in the Second World War and I was a third-class petty officer in the Navy. When I first met Frank Gaffney, shortly after the shock of two big jet planes running into the World Trade Center, and that third jet that was forced down because of a group of brave Americans on that plane in a field in Pennsylvania. At that moment, I knew there was something so massive that my life was going to change as a result of it. Like most Americans, I kept up with what's going on in the world. I was very happy that the Cold War was over. I was very interested in reading. At one time, I was even interested in reading the New York Times. It shows how things can change in life. I don't say that I use it for some awful purpose, but I now look at the New York Times headlines, and I don't get my news from the New York Times. But part of the news that we were watching during this period focused on Iran as a country where we had a president who, I don't even want to define what that president did when we had our hostages in that country for one solid year. And in the period, we got to know a little bit about that country. I guess you can't help but think of some of the great men and some of the great things they've done in life. One of the great men that I think of is someone that I know everyone in this room feels about the same, and that's Ronald Reagan. And I mentioned Ronald Reagan because thinking about Iran and what has been going on in the Middle East, he once told a joke, the punchline of which sums it up. That's the Middle East. And that's what's going on all over that area. Things that can only be characterized as something that defies characterization. Specifically, the thing that I think about when I go back through the 30-year history, I think about some of the nightmares that we had to read about in our newspapers. Probably number one on my particular list was the blowing up of the Marine barracks. And I took the time to get the exact numbers because it's so infuriating to me. 220 U.S. Marines, the finest young men in our country, blown up in a wink, 18 U.S. sailors, and 3 U.S. soldiers. That was just the start. Then there was the attack on the U.S. Cole, where they came in with a bunch of little boats, killed 17 U.S. sailors, and then for the last 7 to 9 years, we have had to read about the rotten and endless use of those improvised explosive devices blowing up our young boys in Iran and Afghanistan. Having lived, like everyone in this room through the Vietnam War. And watching how that entire war and its politicized aftermath took place, it was no surprise, I think, to anyone that the war that's been going on in the Middle East should have created virtually the same kind of feeling on the part of the American public. Bring the boys home. We don't want any more casualty lists. It's just not worth the candle. The game is not worth anything. But unfortunately, that attitude had a very real political fallout. The fallout was really, it was pathetic, it was simplified, and it was neutered away from the reality. The reason that I use some of those words is because of a very strong feeling I have about this name. The attitude became a political football, and the bad guy that caused everything, he caused the foreign and domestic problems, the animal and mineral and you name it problems. One word, Bush. I'm sparing you the reading of the speech or part of the speech that George H.W. Bush gave to the National Endowment for Democracy in 2009. But to put it in a nutshell, everything that has transpired in the Middle East of a negative sort was in that speech as this could happen. And unfortunately, that name, in part, is being brought back to life because the view of his father, George H.W. Bush, for the last 5 or 6 years has been rising steadily in this country as a great American president, a president who had been through all of the things that anyone at that time had to live through. A young man at 18 becoming one of the top Navy fighter pilots and living through being shot down and all of the rest of it. We have now a few things that are worth a special searchlight focus. I think that what we're witnessing is America as a country once again trying to fix some obvious world problems. Probably the thing that hurts most is how those problems fight against the thinking that's burnt into our Constitution, where religion is separated from politics. The reality of extremist groups of men and women who believe fervently in an extreme form of the Muslim religion and whose long-term objective is to create a worldwide and universally followed religion and government, which we have many times been hearing as a thing called the caliphate. The recent series of brutal beheadings that we've had to see either on YouTube or on the front pages of the newspapers that we read have come down to learning about what I characterize as an organized mob with a name called ISIS. And I think because of that, I think we can finally, although not in Washington, not certainly in our government, we can finally refer to our problem as being in a war that was actually declared against us 22 years ago in 1992 by the group that you all know as Al-Qaeda. I gave Frank Gaffney a special name some years ago. I called him the Paul Revere of the 21st century. His horse is radio, television, magazines, and newspapers. And the crucial money that Frank and the center raises have helped to get out this message. There are bad people out there, and they want to hurt us in every way possible. And they are willing to die by the score in order to achieve their objective. My feeling at this moment, when I put this few remarks together, is that America must wake up, but more importantly, stay awake to this threat and to this reality, and that the American people must know the real details of this threat to make sure that we have a national government focused on retaining all of the powers in our Constitution and the proper degree of military strength to ensure our country and the free world's future. All I can say in finishing is thank God for Gaffney and God bless America.